She wasn't trained to fight. She didn't come with orders, ranks, or medals. She came with a camera and questions. High in the mountains, where bullets echo louder than truth, she followed soldiers to document a war the world barely understood. Her job was simple: observe, record, survive. But war doesn't care about job titles. When an ambush erupts without warning, her camera shatters against the rocks, and the line between reporter and soldier disappears in seconds. Surrounded by fire, trapped with no escape, she is forced to make a choice she never imagined: run and die, or fight and live. This is not a story about heroism born from training. This is a story about survival born from fear. About the moment a civilian becomes a weapon. And once she pulls the trigger, there is no going back. The helicopter blades cut through the thin mountain air with a violent, rhythmic roar. Below, jagged brown peaks stretched endlessly, sharp and unforgiving, like the teeth of some ancient beast. Dust swirled upward as the aircraft descended toward a narrow landing zone carved into the mountainside. She tightened her grip on the camera. This was supposed to be just another assignment. Her name didn't matter here. In this place, names were stripped away by altitude, fear, and survival. She was simply the reporter, the outsider riding with soldiers who had learned long ago not to ask why they were sent into places like this. The helicopter touched down hard. Soldiers poured out immediately, boots slamming into gravel, rifles raised, eyes scanning ridgelines with practiced suspicion. Their movements were sharp, rehearsed, almost mechanical. They had done this before, many times. She followed last. Her boots felt heavier the moment they hit the ground. The thin air burned her lungs, and the cold slipped through her jacket like a living thing. She raised the camera instinctively, recording everything: the soldiers forming a perimeter, the dust settling over their gear, the mountains towering like silent witnesses. This was her job. Observe. Record. Do not interfere. She had repeated those rules to herself since the day she volunteered for frontline coverage. She wasn't here to be brave. She wasn't here to be a hero. She was here to show the world what war actually looked like, far from press rooms and headlines. The soldiers barely acknowledged her. They had learned not to get close to people who would eventually leave. "Stay behind us." "Always," the squad leader said without looking at her. His voice was calm, flat, the voice of someone who had seen too much to waste words. She nodded. As they moved along a narrow mountain path, she filmed quietly, careful not to slow them down. The terrain was brutal: loose rocks, steep drops, blind corners where anything could be waiting. Every few steps, soldiers signaled silently to one another, communicating with hand gestures she didn't understand. She noticed how young some of them were. One couldn't have been older than 20. Another had a patch sewn inside his helmet, a child's drawing, barely visible. These were details the world never saw. These were the reasons she was here. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the distant sound of gunfire. Not close, but not far either. The soldiers tensed slightly. She felt it ripple through them like electricity. She lowered the camera. This wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness. A constant readiness, like standing on the edge of a cliff without knowing when the ground might crumble. Hours passed. The patrol continued deeper into the mountains, further from any sense of safety. She recorded interviews during short stops, brief, guarded answers. Names withheld. Faces partially obscured. No one talked about home. No one talked about tomorrow. War existed only in the present tense. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shrank, and the heat crept in. Sweat mixed with dust on her skin. Her arms ached from holding the camera, but she didn't complain. Complaints felt childish here. They reached a narrow ravine just before noon. High rock walls closed in on both sides, turning the path into a funnel. The squad slowed, spacing out carefully. The leader raised his fist. Stop. Everything went quiet. No wind. No distant gunfire. Just the sound of her own breathing inside her helmet. She lifted the camera again, zooming in on the soldiers' faces. Their expressions had changed, jaws tight, eyes sharp, scanning above. This place felt wrong. Even she could sense it. The silence pressed down on her ears until it felt unbearable. She swallowed hard, fingers trembling slightly against the camera controls. Then, the first explosion shattered the mountain. A deafening blast tore through the ravine, throwing rock and dust into the air. The shockwave slammed into her chest, knocking the camera from her hands. She hit the ground hard, her vision spinning. Gunfire erupted instantly. Automatic fire echoed violently between the rock walls, turning the ravine into a killing chamber. Bullets sparked against stone. Soldiers shouted commands over the chaos. Contact left. Left. She scrambled behind a boulder, heart pounding so violently she thought it might break her ribs. Her camera lay several feet away, cracked but still recording, its red light blinking. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the plan. She was a reporter. Another explosion rocked the ground, closer this time. Dust filled her mouth and lungs. She coughed, panic clawing at her chest. Through the smoke, she saw one of the soldiers fall, dragged back by his teammates as blood stained the gravel. The reality hit her like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't a story anymore. This was survival. She pressed herself tighter against the rock, hands shaking uncontrollably. Training? She had none. A weapon? She had none. The rules she lived by, observe, record, stay neutral, collapsed under the weight of incoming fire. A bullet smashed into the rock inches from her head. She screamed. Not a controlled sound. Not a professional reaction. A raw, human scream of terror. The squad leader crawled past her, shouting into his radio, trying to call for air support. His calm from earlier was gone, replaced by urgency and fury. They were trapped. And she realized something terrifying in that moment. No one was coming for her. If she survived this, it wouldn't be because she was a reporter. It would be because she did whatever it took to stay alive. The gunfire never stopped. It came in waves, sharp bursts that echoed off the ravine walls, turning every sound into chaos. Each shot felt closer than the last, as if the mountains themselves were closing in. She kept her head down, forehead pressed against the cold stone, trying to make herself smaller. Her hands were slick with sweat, fingers numb despite the heat. Somewhere behind her, a soldier screamed, a sound cut short far too quickly. She didn't want to look. She wanted this moment to end, to rewind, to become just another clip she could edit safely from home. But the smell of burning explosives and blood made escape impossible. Move. Move. A soldier grabbed her shoulder, pulling her behind a cluster of rocks as bullets ripped through the space she'd occupied seconds earlier. Her heart hammered violently. Stay here, he yelled before sprinting back into the fight. She curled inward, breath coming in shallow gasps. The ground vibrated beneath her as another explosion tore into the ravine entrance. Rocks collapsed, blocking the path they had come from. Her camera lay half-buried in dust nearby. Instinct screamed at her to grab it. This was the story of a lifetime. But her body refused to move. The fear was too heavy, crushing logic beneath it. She peeked over the rock. The squad was pinned down, spread thin along the ravine. Enemy fire rained from above, from positions she couldn't see. Every time a soldier tried to move, bullets chased them back. This was an ambush, deliberate, prepared, merciless. A soldier crawled past her, clutching his leg. Blood soaked through his uniform, dark and frightening. His eyes met hers for a split second. There was no accusation there, only fear. Medic, someone shouted. No answer came. She felt useless. This wasn't the war she had studied. This wasn't the war shown in documentaries. This was fast, ugly, and deeply personal. People didn't fall dramatically. They collapsed. They bled. They vanished behind smoke and dust. Another explosion hit near the ravine wall. The shockwave knocked her sideways, slamming her shoulder against stone. Pain shot through her arm. She bit back a scream, tears blurring her vision. Her helmet slipped, and for a moment, the sky filled her view. Bright blue, peaceful, uncaring. How could the world look so calm while this happened? The radio crackled with broken signals. The squad leader shouted coordinates, his voice raw, desperate. No air support. Too close. Too narrow. She understood the words even if she didn't understand the tactics. They were on their own. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Seconds stretched endlessly between bursts of gunfire. Her body shook uncontrollably, adrenaline surging without release. Then she noticed it. A rifle lay on the ground not far from her position. It rested beside a fallen soldier, his body still, eyes staring at nothing. The sight punched the air from her lungs. She turned away instinctively, bile rising in her throat. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't look at the weapon. Her entire identity screamed against the idea. She wasn't trained. She wasn't authorized. She wasn't allowed. She was a reporter. Another bullet cracked against the stone, showering her with debris. The rules no longer mattered. A soldier near the front went down, hit in the chest. He collapsed backward, landing hard. No one could reach him. The fire was too intense. The squad was breaking. She realized then that staying hidden wasn't safety. It was delay. Delay until the next bullet found her. Her breathing slowed suddenly, replaced by a strange clarity. Fear was still there, but something else pushed through it. Instinct. The primal urge to live. She crawled forward, inch by inch, heart pounding so loudly, she thought everyone could hear it. Every movement felt exposed. Every sound felt like a beacon. Her hand brushed against the rifle. She froze. The metal was warm. Too warm. Her fingers trembled violently as she wrapped them around the grip. It felt wrong, heavy, foreign, terrifying. This wasn't a camera. This wasn't a tool to tell stories. This was a tool that ended them. She pulled it closer, tears spilling freely now. Her chest tightened, breathing shallow and fast. "I can't," she whispered to no one. Then the sound of boots scrambling above caught her attention. A shadow moved along the ridge. The enemy was repositioning. If they pushed further down into the ravine, there would be nowhere left to hide. Her hands tightened around the rifle. She remembered the faces of the soldiers she had filmed hours earlier. Their quiet discipline. Their acceptance of risk. Their trust in one another. They had protected her. Now they were dying. Her finger rested near the trigger, shaking uncontrollably. She didn't aim. She didn't think. She simply reacted. She leaned out from behind the rock and fired. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The sound was deafening, violent, nothing like the controlled clicks of her camera. Dust kicked up near the ridge. She fired again. And again. She didn't know if she hit anything. She didn't know if it mattered. But the return fire paused, just for a moment. That moment was enough. Soldiers shifted positions, dragging the wounded to cover. Orders were shouted. Movement returned. She ducked back, heart racing, the rifle slipping from her grip. Her hands were empty again, but she knew something had changed. She had crossed a line. And there was no uncrossing it. The world went quiet again. Not the calm kind of quiet, the hollow kind that rang in her ears long after the gunfire paused. Her hands were still raised, fingers curled, as if the rifle were still there. But it wasn't. It lay on the ground in front of her, abandoned like something poisonous. Her chest burned. Each breath felt too shallow, too fast. Her heart pounded so violently it blurred her vision. She stared at her palms, half expecting to see blood on them. There was none. That didn't make her feel better. "Good cover fire," someone shouted. The words barely registered. Cover fire. As if what she'd just done had a name. As if it fit into a category she could understand. She wasn't sure she was still the same person. The squad moved with renewed urgency, using the brief pause she'd created. 2 soldiers dragged the wounded back, one limping badly, the other pale and shaking. The squad leader threw her a glance, not of anger, not of approval, just surprise. He hadn't expected that from her. Neither had she. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice came through clearer. Air support inbound. 2 mics. 2 minutes. It sounded so close. It felt like forever. She pressed herself against the rock again, the rifle within reach now, Not by accident, but by choice. Her fingers brushed the grip, less hesitant this time. Above them, movement returned. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were adjusting. A figure appeared briefly along the ridge line. A man crouched low, scanning the ravine below with a weapon raised. He was real. Not a shadow. Not a blur. A person. Her breath caught in her throat. This was different from before. Before, she'd fired blindly. Now she saw him clearly, the outline of his body, the way he leaned forward, the intent in his posture. Time slowed. She raised the rifle. The weapon felt impossibly heavy, as if it knew what she was about to ask of it. Her arms trembled, muscles screaming under the strain. She didn't know how to aim properly. She didn't know distances or wind. She knew only one thing. If he fired, someone below would die. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and final. The man jerked backward. For a split second, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then he fell, not dramatically, not slowly, just gone, disappearing from the ridge. Her stomach dropped. She lowered the rifle, hands numb. She had hit him. The realization slammed into her with more force than the recoil ever could. Her vision tunneled, the edges darkening. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to vomit. "I shot him," she whispered. No one heard her. The guilt came fast, faster than fear. A crushing weight that pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She hadn't meant to become this. She hadn't come here to end lives. She had come to tell stories. A hand clamped down on her shoulder. She flinched violently, nearly swinging the rifle around before she recognized the squad leader. "Hey," he said, voice steady. "Stay with us. You did good."
Good.
The word echoed in her head like a cruel joke. He didn't wait for response. He turned back to the fight, barking orders, trusting her, trusting this version of her, to hold her position. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't good or strong or capable. But another figure appeared on the ridge. Then another. She raised the rifle again. The helicopter arrived moments later. The sound came first, a distant thump that grew louder by the second. The mountains trembled as the aircraft swept into view, rotors cutting violently through the air. Its presence changed everything. Enemy fire intensified instantly, desperate now. The helicopter banked hard, unleashing a storm of rounds toward the ridge. Explosions tore through enemy positions, sending debris flying. She watched in stunned silence as the tide turned. Smoke filled the ravine, thick and choking. The squad advanced carefully, securing the area while the helicopter hovered above, its guns scanning for remaining threats. The fight ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence returned, heavier than before. Bodies lay scattered along the ridge and ravine floor. Some moved. Some didn't. She sat back against the rock, the rifle slipping from her hands at last. Her arms ached. Her head throbbed. Her soul felt bruised. The squad leader approached her slowly this time. "You okay?" he asked. She opened her mouth to answer, and broke. The sobs came without warning, violent and uncontrollable. Her body folded inward as everything she had been holding back poured out. She cried for the man on the ridge, for the fallen soldiers, for herself, for the person she had been that morning. The leader didn't stop her. He didn't tell her to be strong. He simply stood there, silent, letting the moment pass. Above them, the helicopter circled once more, then began to pull away. She watched it go, the image burned into her mind. She would see it again.
She knew that now.
Because the war hadn't ended for her. It had only begun. The ravine smelled like smoke, metal, and blood. It clung to everything, her clothes, her hair, her skin, as if the mountain itself refused to let the battle go. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ambush drained away slowly, leaving behind a hollow ache in her chest. She sat on a flat rock, knees pulled tight against her body, staring at the ground. No one asked her to move. No one told her what to do. For the first time since the fighting stopped, She felt invisible again. The soldiers worked around her with quiet efficiency. Weapons were cleared. Wounded were stabilized. The dead were covered with ponchos, their shapes unmistakable beneath the fabric. Each one felt like a question she would never be able to answer. She couldn't stop replaying the moment. The ridge. The man. The fall. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, remembering the pressure of the trigger. She rubbed her hands together as if trying to wash something off that wasn't there. "You saved lives today." The voice startled her. She looked up to see the squad leader standing a few feet away. His helmet was off now, revealing tired eyes and a thin cut along his forehead. "I killed someone," she said flatly.
He didn't argue.
"That's war," he replied quietly. The words felt heavy and meaningless at the same time. She wanted to tell him she didn't belong here, that this wasn't her fight, that she would give anything to undo what she'd done. But she said none of it, because some part of her knew, deep down, that no matter how much she denied it, the choice had been hers. A helicopter thumped overhead again, a different one this time, arriving to extract the wounded and the dead. Medics moved quickly, loading stretchers with practiced urgency. As the aircraft lifted off, she watched it rise into the sky, smaller and smaller, until it disappeared beyond the mountain peaks. She wondered how many helicopters had left places like this carrying broken people, and how many never left at all. They moved out an hour later. The patrol was over. The mission was technically complete, but no one spoke as they descended the mountain path. There was nothing left to say. Her camera was returned to her, cracked lens, scratched casing, but still functional. She stared at it for a long time before slinging it over her shoulder. It felt heavier than it had that morning. Back at the forward operating base, the debriefing was brief and clinical.
Times.
Positions. Casualties. No emotions allowed. She sat in the corner, answering questions when asked, her voice distant even to herself. Yes.
No.
I don't know. One officer studied her longer than necessary. "You fired a weapon?" he asked. She nodded. "Did you hit a target?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." There was a pause. Noted.
Just like that.
No follow-up. No counseling. No acknowledgement of what that meant for someone who had arrived unarmed and unprepared. She was dismissed. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ridge again. The moments stretched endlessly. The shot, the fall, the silence afterward. Her heart raced, palms slick with sweat. Somewhere outside, a helicopter lifted off into the darkness. She sat up abruptly, breath caught in her chest. The sound triggered something deep and primal. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, muscles tensing, heart pounding. She was still in the ravine. She wasn't safe. The sound faded, but the fear didn't. Morning came gray and cold. She was scheduled to leave the base within 48 hours. The assignment was technically over. Another reporter would replace her. Another story would move on without her. Or at least, that's what she thought. A call came through just after dawn. A reconnaissance helicopter had gone down overnight in the mountains. Possible hostile fire. Unknown survivors. The squad leader was being reassigned to assist with search and recovery. She overheard the briefing from across the room. Her chest tightened. The image flashed instantly in her mind. Spinning rotors, fire in the sky, metal tearing apart against stone. She didn't want to hear gunfire again. Didn't want to feel the weight of a weapon in her hands. But when the squad leader approached her, she already knew what he was going to say. "They want someone who knows the terrain," he said. "Someone who was there." She laughed weakly. "You mean someone who survived?" He met her eyes. "They also want documentation. Official record." Her camera suddenly felt like an anchor dragging her down. "I'm not a soldier," she said. "Neither were you yesterday," he replied. The words hit harder than he intended. She looked past him, toward the hangar where another helicopter sat idling, blades slowly turning. The sound vibrated through the ground, through her bones. She thought about leaving, about boarding the next transport out of the mountains and never looking back. But then she remembered the soldiers still out there. The ones who wouldn't get that choice. "I'll go," she said quietly. The squad leader nodded once. As she strapped into the helicopter minutes later, her hands shook, but this time, she didn't hide it. The aircraft lifted off, climbing steadily toward the mountains. Ahead of them, smoke curled faintly into the sky. The crash site was waiting. The helicopter vibrated violently as it climbed. The mountains rose to meet them, dark and jagged against the pale morning sky. Inside the aircraft, no one spoke. The only sounds were the relentless thumping of the rotors and the metallic rattle of gears strapped to the floor. She sat rigid in her seat, camera secured against her chest like a shield. Her eyes stayed fixed on the open side door, watching the terrain slide past beneath them, steep ridges, deep valleys, endless places to disappear. This time, she wasn't just observing. This time, she understood exactly how fragile this machine was. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Approaching last known coordinates. Her stomach tightened. Smoke came into view first, a thin black line rising from a distant slope. The crash site. Confirmation that something had gone terribly wrong. The helicopter banked slightly. That's when it happened. A sharp bang ripped through the airframe. The aircraft lurched violently to one side. Warning alarms screamed instantly, red lights flashing across the interior. The sudden drop slammed her back against the seat as gravity seemed to disappear. "What was that?" someone shouted. Another impact followed, closer, heavier. Enemy fire. The mountains erupted around them as bullets, and debris tore through the air. The helicopter shuddered, metal screaming under the strain. She clutched the harness, heart slamming against her ribs. "Mayday! Mayday!" the pilot yelled. "We're taking fire, losing control." The nose dipped sharply. Her stomach rose into her throat as the world tilted downward. Outside the door, the mountains rushed toward them with terrifying speed. This was it. There was no time to think. The tail rotor failed with a violent crack, and the helicopter began to spin. Equipment broke loose, slamming into the walls. A soldier was thrown sideways, hitting the floor hard. She screamed as the ground surged upward. The impact came like a god's fist. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. The helicopter slammed into the mountainside, skidding and tearing apart as it slid down the slope. Her body was thrown forward, straps biting into her shoulders as everything went black. She woke to silence. Not complete silence. Ringing, distant crackling. The low groan of twisted metal, but no gunfire. No alarms. Her head throbbed violently. Every breath burned. Smoke filled the wreckage, thick and choking. She coughed, vision blurring as she tried to move. Pain flared along her ribs and shoulder, sharp and unforgiving. "Hello," she whispered. No answer. The helicopter lay on its side, broken open like a wounded animal. Fire licked at the rear section, creeping closer to fuel lines that hissed ominously. Panic surged. She fumbled with her harness, fingers clumsy and numb. It took 3 tries before the buckle released, dropping her hard onto the floor. Pain shot through her spine, but adrenaline forced her forward. She crawled toward the opening, coughing violently. Outside, the mountain was eerily quiet. The crash site was scattered with debris, twisted metal, torn equipment, fragments of lives. One soldier lay motionless near the wreck, helmet cracked open. She froze.
No.
She forced herself to move again, pushing past the horror. Smoke poured from the helicopter now, flames growing stronger. If it exploded, anyone still inside would die. "Is anyone alive?" she shouted, voice breaking. A weak groan answered from nearby. She followed the sound, stumbling over rocks and wreckage until she found him, the squad leader, pinned beneath a chunk of twisted metal. Blood ran down the side of his face, soaking into the dirt. "You're alive," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. "Barely," he muttered. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Her heart sank. "They know we're down," he said grimly. "They'll come." The words hit harder than the crash. Enemy forces. No air support. No immediate rescue. Just them. She tried to lift the metal pinning him down. It didn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm her again, but she forced it down, breathing hard. "I'll get help," she said. He grabbed her wrist weakly. "No time," he said. "You have to move." She stared at him, disbelief flooding her face. "I'm not leaving you. You're not a reporter anymore," he said quietly. "You're a survivor. Act like one." The truth of it settled heavily in her chest. She looked around the crash site again. A weapon lay nearby, another rifle, thrown clear of the wreck. Her gaze lingered on it longer than before. There was no hesitation this time. She picked it up. The weight felt familiar now. Terrifying, but familiar. She checked the magazine the way she had seen the soldiers do. Her movements weren't perfect, but they were steady. Focus replaced panic. Footsteps echoed faintly across the rocks. They were coming. She dragged the squad leader behind a cluster of boulders, ignoring the pain screaming through her body. Every second mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. She took position behind cover, rifle raised, eyes scanning the slope. The camera was gone, lost in the crash. For the first time since arriving in the warzone, she didn't care. She wasn't here to document anymore. She was here to protect. The wind shifted, carrying voices toward her. Unfamiliar, hostile. She tightened her grip on the rifle. The observer was gone. Only the fighter remained. The footsteps grew louder. She pressed her back against the cold rock, breathing slow, controlled, just like she'd seen the soldiers do. Fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest, but it no longer ruled her. Something sharper had taken its place. Focus. She peeked around the boulder. 3 figures moved carefully up the slope, rifles raised, scanning the wreckage. They spoke quietly in a language she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. They were hunting. She pulled back, mind racing. She had 1 rifle, limited ammunition, 1 wounded soldier who couldn't move fast. No radio, no camera, no backup, only terrain. She studied the slope again, forcing herself to see it the way the soldiers would. Angles, cover, lines of sight. Rocks formed natural choke points. Narrow paths where movement would be forced and predictable. She positioned herself slightly uphill, giving herself the advantage. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady now. The first enemy rounded the boulder cautiously. She fired. The shot echoed violently, sending birds exploding from nearby cliffs. The man dropped instantly. No hesitation. No second thoughts. The others scattered, shouting warnings. Return fire ripped into the rocks around her, chips of stone slicing through the air. She ducked, rolling to new cover just as bullets shredded her previous position. They were trained. She moved again, fast, decisive, scrambling higher, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She fired short bursts this time, controlled, forcing them to keep their heads down. 1 enemy tried to flank her from the right. She anticipated it. She waited until he exposed himself, then fired. He fell hard, sliding down the slope, disappearing behind debris. Her breath came fast now, but she stayed aware. This wasn't rage. This was calculation. A scream cut through the air. She froze. The squad leader. One of them had spotted him. She spun, firing toward the sound, suppressing the area long enough to break contact. She sprinted back toward the boulders, sliding into position between the wounded man and the attackers. "Stay with me," she whispered to him, even as bullets snapped overhead. The remaining enemy pulled back, regrouping. They were testing her now, probing for weakness. She knew what that meant. This wasn't over. She scanned the wreckage quickly, grabbing extra magazines from fallen gear, stuffing them into her vest with clumsy urgency. Her body ached, sweat stung her eyes, but her mind was clear. She had crossed another line. She was thinking like them. The wind shifted again. She smelled smoke. The wreckage fire was spreading. If the fuel ignited, the blast would kill them both. She had to move him. "Can you crawl?" she asked. He nodded weakly. She helped him inch downhill toward thicker cover, every movement a risk. Gunfire erupted again. Wild this time, desperate. She returned fire, keeping it just accurate enough to pin them. The enemy finally broke. Footsteps retreated. Voices faded. Silence returned once more. She stayed frozen, rifle raised, scanning for movement long after they were gone. Her body trembled now, not with fear, but with the delayed shock of what she had just done. She exhaled slowly. They were alive.
For now.
The squad leader looked at her with something close to awe. "You should have been one of us," he said hoarsely. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "I shouldn't have." They waited hours like that. Every sound made her tense. Every shadow felt alive. She rationed ammunition, adjusted her position, kept watch without sleeping. When rescue finally came, another helicopter cresting the ridge, guns scanning, she didn't relax until soldiers were on the ground, weapons trained outward. Only then did she lower her rifle. Her hands started shaking again immediately. Medics rushed in, lifting the squad leader onto a stretcher. Someone guided her away from the wreckage, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe now," a voice said.
Safe.
The word felt strange. As she was led toward the helicopter, she glanced back at the crash site one last time. The smoke, the blood, the place where the last pieces of her old self had burned away. She climbed aboard without looking back. The helicopter lifted off. Below, the mountains swallowed the wreckage whole. The helicopter felt different this time. Not louder, not rougher, just heavier. She sat on the metal floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled in, rifle resting loosely across her lap. No one told her to put it down. No one asked her to explain. The soldiers around her kept their distance, glancing at her the way people look at something fragile or dangerous. The mountains drifted away beneath them, distant and unreal. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. A medic knelt in front of her, shining a light into her eyes, checking her pulse, asking questions she barely heard. "What's your name? Are you hurt? How many fingers?" She answered automatically. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying moments she couldn't shut off. The first shot, the fall, the scream, the smell of smoke mixed with blood. She blinked hard, trying to ground herself. The helicopter landed at the base with a violent jolt. The doors opened and cold air rushed in, sharp and clean compared to the mountain smoke. Soldiers moved fast, unloading the wounded. She stayed where she was. Someone touched her arm gently. "You need to come with us." She stood on unsteady legs and followed. The debrief room was small, windowless, and too bright. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A table, 3 chairs. A recorder placed neatly in the center. She sat. 2 officers entered. One in uniform, one in civilian clothes. The civilian smiled politely. "This won't take long," he said. She didn't believe him. They asked her to walk through everything from the ambush to the crash to the firefight afterward.
Times.
Positions. Decisions. When they reached the part about the rifle, the room felt colder. "You fired multiple rounds?" the officer asked. "Yes." "At confirmed hostile targets?" "Yes." "How many?" She hesitated. "I don't know." The civilian leaned forward. "You don't know or you don't remember?" Her throat tightened. "I remember too much," she said quietly. Silence followed. They exchanged a glance. "Were you instructed to engage?" the officer asked.
No.
"Did anyone order you to fire?"
No.
Another pause. The civilian clicked his pen. "Then explain why you did." The question hit harder than any explosion.
Why?
Because she was scared. Because she wanted to live. Because someone else would have died. But none of those answers felt complete. "Because there was no one else," she said finally. They wrote something down. The interview ended shortly after that. No accusations. No praise. Just paperwork. She was escorted to a quiet room with a bed and told to rest. Someone left a bottle of water on the table. The door clicked shut behind them. That's when it hit her. The silence. No gunfire. No engines. No commands. Her body gave up. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor, back pressed against the cold surface. Her breathing hitched, shallow and uneven. Then she broke. The sobs tore out of her chest, violent and uncontrolled. She cried until her throat burned and her head throbbed. She cried for the men who didn't make it out, for the ones who did, for the person she used to be. She pressed her fists against her eyes, trying to stop the images. They wouldn't stop. She saw the ridge, the falling body, the trigger pulling back. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. The words echoed uselessly in the empty room. Hours passed, or minutes. Time didn't matter. Eventually someone knocked. The squad leader stood there, arm in a sling, face pale but alive. "You okay?" he asked softly. She laughed, a broken sound.
No, she said.
"I don't think I ever will be." He nodded like he understood. "Neither am I." They stood there for a moment, sharing the quiet weight of survival. "You saved my life," he said. She shook her head. "I changed it."
He didn't argue.
That night, she slept, but not deeply. Dreams dragged her back to the mountains again and again. She woke soaked in sweat, heart racing, fingers curled like they were still gripping a rifle. Morning came. Orders came with it. She was being pulled from the field. Immediate extraction. Non-negotiable. As she boarded the transport aircraft, she looked back at the base one last time. Helicopters lifted and landed. Soldiers moved with purpose. Life went on. She wondered how long it would take for her to catch up. The war did not end when the aircraft landed. That was the first truth she learned. The runway stretched out beneath the plane, clean and orderly, nothing like the jagged mountains she had left behind. People moved calmly outside the windows. No one ran. No one shouted. No one bled. She should have felt relieved. Instead, her chest tightened. When the plane stopped, she waited longer than necessary before standing. Her legs felt unfamiliar, as if they belonged to someone else. When she finally stepped onto the ground, the air felt wrong, too safe, too quiet. She had come back. But not all of her had returned. At home, people asked questions. How was it? Was it scary? Did you get everything on camera? She learned quickly which answers ended conversations fastest. Yes. Very.
No.
At night, sleep came in fragments. She would wake suddenly, heart racing, convinced she heard helicopters overhead. Sometimes it was the sound of traffic. Sometimes it was nothing at all. She stopped reaching for the camera. The device that once felt like an extension of her body now sat untouched on a shelf, gathering dust. Every time she looked at it, her hands remembered the weight of something else. The rifle. She tried to go back to work. The newsroom felt unreal. Bright lights, coffee cups, quiet keyboards. Stories scrolled across screens. Politics, weather, distant conflicts reduced to numbers and headlines. She couldn't listen. She walked out halfway through her first assignment and never returned. Therapy helped. A little. They taught her words for what she felt. Survivor's guilt. Post-traumatic stress. Moral injury. Names didn't fix it. Some days were manageable. Others weren't. Crowded places made her tense. Sudden noises sent her heart into overdrive. She sat with her back to walls, scanned exits without thinking. War habits. She avoided mirrors for a long time. When she finally looked, she didn't recognize the person staring back. The eyes were older,
Sharper.
carrying things they couldn't put down. Months passed. Then a message arrived. From the squad leader. He was recovering. Physical wounds healing slowly. Mental ones slower. They met once. Just coffee. Neutral ground. They didn't talk about the firefight. Or the crash. Or the ridge. They didn't need to. Before they parted, he said something that stayed with her. You didn't become a soldier, he said. You just learned what soldiers carry. The words followed her home. One evening, she turned on the television. Footage from another conflict filled the screen. Explosions, soldiers moving through smoke, reporters speaking calmly over chaos. She didn't turn it off. She watched. Not as a reporter. As a witness. For the first time, she understood the distance between those who watch war and those who survive it. Weeks later, she opened a blank document. No deadlines. No editors. No cameras. She began to write. Not about tactics. Not about politics. About fear. About choices. About the moment neutrality breaks. She wrote about a woman who came to document a war and left carrying it inside her. She didn't change the ending. Some stories don't need a clean one. When the piece was finished, she didn't publish it immediately. She let it sit. Read it again.
And again.
Then she sent it. The response was quiet.
Slow. Deep.
People didn't call her brave. They thanked her for telling the truth. Years later, helicopters still caught her attention. She still woke some nights, with her heart racing. But she also learned how to breathe through it, how to live with what she carried. She never picked up a weapon again. She never needed to, because the war had already left its mark. Not on her body, on her soul. And that was something no battlefield could ever take.